Dzień dobry. Będę mówić po angielsku, ale chciałabym jednak powiedzieć kilka słów po polsku i przede wszystkim podziękować Fundacji Auxilium za zorganizowanie tej ważnej konferencji. The European Centre for Law and Justice is working on the issue of pornography. Our research will lead to the publication of a report or a book in 2023. And when I saw the conference theme, it seemed to me that this issue is essential here and could not be ignored. This speech is based on a part of our research. It will include a certain number of figures, references to legal texts, and I propose not to mention here the precise source of each element, since all of this will appear in the proceedings of the whole conference. So let's start. Pornography is a long-standing issue, especially regarding the protection of minors. But now it is more urgent than ever with the advent of the digital era, where this type of content is just a click away and with which families must deal. On the other hand, the pandemic aggravated this phenomenon. What is pornography? It is the depiction of sexual subjects for the sole purpose of sexual arousal. Violence is omnipresent. According to the analysis of the 50 most popular porn videos, 88% of the scenes contain physical violence and 49% contain at least one verbal aggression. Moreover, this degrading treatment is almost always perpetrated against vulnerable people, mainly women, and also children, as we know. On this last point, I would just like to say that contrary to what some believe, this type of content can be found not only on the dark web, but also on legal sites, as the New York Times clearly revealed in December 2020. This being said, we are currently living in a pornographic consumer society, since porn is the consumer product above all, accessible for free and anonymously in an unlimited way, everywhere and at all times. Figures don't lie. More than a quarter of the world's video web traffic involves pornography. According to the French porn film director Ovidie, in 10 years, humanity has watched the equivalent of 1.2 million years of porn. A 2021 report by the Council of Europe indicates that an estimated 50% of internet traffic is sex-related, and that approximately 66% of men and 41% of women watch this type of content each month. Another interesting figure shows that this phenomenon has literally exploded in 2 decades. A survey revealed that in 2012, 82% of French women said that they had already seen porn, compared to 23% in 1992. As regards minors, figures are alarming, as we will see later. It is also unanimously recognized that the COVID pandemic has aggravated the phenomenon because of lockdown. For example, Pornhub's frequentation has thus jumped by 22% between March and April 2020. Pornography is thus a mass phenomenon to which no one is immune. Despite this, it is still a taboo subject. Society seems to become aware very slowly of the harmfulness of pornography and of the fact that it involves serious violations of human rights. Although some try to make believe it, warning against this plague is neither regressive nor showing prudishness or religious moralism, even if it's true that the Catholic Church rightly warns for a long time against that. The 1992 Catechism states that it does grave injury to the dignity of its participants, actors, vendors, the public, since each one becomes an object of base pleasure and illicit profit for others. Warning is being concerned about the general interest by highlighting the existence of a real public health crisis in this matter, because it affects the whole society. And the fundamental cell of society is precisely family, as recognized by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Family is therefore primarily impacted. We will thus specifically highlight the consequences of pornography, whatever is its nature, for families, before assessing the answers to be brought to try to remedy this plague. So, the consequences of pornography for families. We will see that families are currently suffering for pornography because it has serious consequences for children and for couples. Before addressing these issues, I would like to emphasize that pornography is risky for anyone. It would be naive to believe that it suddenly becomes harmless at the age of 18. The risks for physical and psychological health are proven, especially in terms of sexual dysfunctions and addictions. Neurosciences now show that the brain's reaction to pornography is similar to that caused by hard drugs, such as cocaine. So the consequences of pornography for children. Would we let a child watch what happens in a brothel? Yet this is what pornography left online within the reach of youth amounts to. Studies show that minors are increasingly exposed to pornography. According to a 2017 French study, 63% of boys and 37% of girls aged from 15 to 17 have already surfed at least once a website to watch pornographic films. This proportion is growing since in 2013, the same figure was 53% among boys, so plus 10 points in 4 years. The lowering of age of first viewing pornography is also worrying. In Poland, a recent report revealed that currently it takes place on average just before the age of 11. There is also concern about the frequency with which young people watch pornography. According to the same Polish report, nearly 1 in 4 16-year-olds who watch porn admit doing so daily. Among the 12 to 14-year-olds, the figure is just over 1 in 5. But how are young people confronted with this type of content? Smartphones obviously contribute to this. In Poland, the young people surveyed most often said that this type of device was the main way they access this content for 76.2% of the 16-year-olds and 66.9% of the 12 to 14-year-olds. Besides, pornographic industry will stop at nothing to attract customers, thanks to various techniques that the youngest cannot escape. Advertising clicks, homepage hijacking, clandestine sites, social networks, illegal downloading and streaming. It must be said that for this industry, the exposure of minors to online pornography is a manna in the order of about $800 million per year, including about $150 million for accidental exposure alone, not to mention the fact that they are the customers of tomorrow. The harmfulness of pornography for children. From a physiological point of view, pornography has a very important impact on young people because of their sensitivity to dopamine, that is to say, the pleasure hormone, and because of their brain's plasticity, which allows for huge advances in learning and thinking, make also them more vulnerable. Early exposure to pornography is therefore not without consequences, as shown by research. It can induce mental and behavioral disturbances similar to those of sexual abuse. The Council of Europe recognized that this exposure brings increased risks of addiction to pornography, as well as difficulties with developing balanced, respectful relationships in future life. It results in the blurring of the boundaries of normal curiosity towards sexuality and those of socially acceptable behavior. Indeed, it leads to the development of unrealistic and distorted expectations about sexuality and misleading attitudes about relationships, especially since pornography has increasingly become one of the main sources of information about sex and sexuality for young people. A French study found that 73% of boys in middle school believe that X-rated movies have been part of sexual learning. Correlatively, early exposure to pornography increases harmful and risky sexual behaviors. Early sexual activity, sexting, multiple sexual partners, deviant sexual practices, vulnerability to STD. It also causes significant psychological damage to youth by affecting their self-esteem, well-being, relationships, achievements in school. Perfect bodies exposed in these contents are likely to generate complexes in adolescence. Studies suggest that children who use pornography have lower levels of social integration. There is also a higher incidence of depressive symptoms and reduced emotional bonding with caregivers. Minors are thus put at risk because they watch pornography, but also because other young people and adults watch it. An increase in sexual violence between young people can be observed, and the correlation of this with pornography is recognized. Child pornography can also be mentioned in this context. The fact that children appear in such content encourages their abuse. Indeed, according to the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the sale of children, child prostitution, and child pornography, while a person who visits child pornography sites is not necessarily a potential child abuser, statistically speaking, most predators arrested were in possession of significant collections of child pornography. Let's turn to the consequences of pornography for couples. Pornography gives rise to difficulties within couples and has been shown to lead to the destruction of many families. Pornography is the commodification of actors, especially women, often in a context of violence and contempt. This has a direct impact on the respect accorded to women at all levels, not only in the intimate sphere, but also in the professional, public, and, of course, family sphere. And thus, pornography can lead to submission relationship, inequality, and violence within couples. And a study on women victims of domestic violence showed that 73% of those who had been raped said that their partner watched pornography. In pornography, sexuality is disconnected from intimacy and affection and reduced to a simple mechanical action whose goal is performance. As a result, research shows a correlation between the use of pornography and the reduced satisfaction and low commitment in relationships, as well as change in sexual tastes. It also reveals that pornography users are often disappointed in intimate relationships with their partner, which also leads to decreased trust between partners, increased risk of developing a negative body image, belief that marriage is sexually restrictive, and decreased prospects for raising children. Pornography consumption increases the likelihood of marital infidelity by 300%, and that's right that it is in itself a form of extramarital relationship. The likelihood of divorce doubles for men and women who watch pornography, and the 2002 survey of US attorneys found that 56% of their divorce cases litigated in the previous year had as a significant factor an obsessive interest in internet pornography. At the end of this first part, and in order to open a reflection on the subject to a more spiritual dimension, one could also ask whether pornography does not have an impact on priestly and religious vocations, in the same way as it has on marriage, which is also a vocation. Regarding the birth of such vocations, an author argues that when someone views pornography regularly, they often develop a shame-based relationship with God and an incapacity to human relationships and intimacy. These two big factors often keep or delay one from entering into the vocation to which God is calling them. Now, regarding the persistence of the vocation. Analogy with marriage does not seem to be without interest, especially since the priestly and the religious vocation does not provide immunity from pornography. A 2001 survey of religious leaders revealed that 40% of evangelical Protestant clergy members in the United States struggle with pornography. As Pope Francis has just reminded the seminarians and priests studying in Rome in October, it is a thing that wakens the soul. The devil enters in this way. He wakens the priestly heart. So we can say that pornography steals vocations. So it's a good thing to be aware of the facts and the extent of the pornographic plague. It's still then essential to take concrete action to protect ourselves and our families. So let's turn to the action to protect families. Before addressing this question, from a maybe more legal perspective, it is interesting to note that in 1989, the Pontifical Council for Social Communications drew up a document addressed in particular to families and proposing guidelines for dealing with the problem of pornography in the media. It defines 7 sectors with obligations in this matter: professional communicators, parents, educators, youth, the general public, public authorities, and the church and religious groups. This shows that the fight against the scourge of pornography is truly everyone's business and a serious problem. As recently as last October, during debates at the United Nations, the Holy See delegation recalled that it is a mistake to think that a society where an abnormal consumption of internet sex is rampant among adults could be capable of effectively protecting minors. Thus, the role of adults is crucial. It is necessary for them to take a stand on this problem, bearing in mind that their behavior can in itself be detrimental to children, and that the testimony of life is of great importance here, especially as regards parents. It is therefore essential to find solutions that benefit everyone, and states have a great responsibility in this matter, as guardians of the common good. The above-mentioned document states that public authorities must feel obliged to take prompt action to deal with this problem where it already exists and to prevent it from arising in places where it may not yet have become an urgent matter. Dealing with prevention and awareness raising and then regulation of access to pornography, I will present some non-exhaustive examples of measures that are more or less effective in themselves, but which combined give hope of curbing the phenomenon and protecting families. I would like to stress that European institutions, Council of Europe, European Union, are in favor of many of these measures. So implementing prevention and awareness-raising policies. In this area, it is important to understand pornography as a public health issue and to ensure education related to this issue. Understanding pornography as a public health issue. It may be appropriate to begin by expressly recognizing through non-binding resolutions the danger of pornography at all levels and, for example, to public health, as is done for smoking or alcoholism. In the United States, 17 states have done so on the basis of a project initiated by the National Center on Sexual Exploitations. Other states have included pornography in national health programs. Poland, in its national health program for 2016 to 2020, developed in a section about prevention of psychological health problems and improvement of psychological well-being of society, various objectives related to pornography consumption by children and youth. There seems to be no mention of pornography in the current National Health Program, which is regrettable as the pandemic has increased the risk in this area. People suffering from an addiction to pornography are not rare, and many would like to free themselves from it but are unable to. In fact, this is rarely treated, unlike other types of addiction, notably because of the taboo maintained on pornography and its dangers. It is therefore urgent to develop and make accessible therapies in this field in the same way as for alcoholism, drug addiction, or smoking. Then, to denounce the harmful effects of pornography, to demystify the real business behind this industry, or in a positive way to promote a healthy representation of women, it is appropriate to organize public information and awareness campaigns for the general public. And in 2021, France, for instance, set up a campaign in the form of a 30-second shock spot to denounce the exposure of minors to pornography. It is also essential to provide young people with a healthy and quality education in emotional, relational, and sexual matters that gives a positive vision of sexuality that is not limited to simple pleasure-seeking techniques. And parents have here a fundamental role to play in sexuality education, especially concerning protection of children from exposure to pornography. In Poland, a recent study indicates that 58.5% of young people surveyed had not discussed about internet pornography and its consequences with their parents. The fact is that few parents are truly aware of the extent of pornography consumption among young people. However, in this area, the principle is first come, first served, because it is a question of getting ahead of the pornographic vision of sexuality, thanks to a healthy and coherent discourse by parents, providing a positive vision of sexuality to which children can refer if they are ever confronted with something negative. There is still a need for education policies on the proper use of information and communication technologies, providing for media literacy in the context of pornography. As required by some Council of Europe conventions, the aim here is to deal with the risks of sexual exploitation and sexual abuse, as well as the means to protect themselves linked to these technologies. Now, regulating pornographic supply and access to pornography. There is a general consensus on the need to condemn pornography in its most obvious abuses, mistreatment of so-called actors, child pornography, trafficking in human beings, and sexual exploitation. There is also a consensus on the need to prevent minors' access to pornography in the name of the rights of the child. And European institutions call on states to act in this sense. In particular, it is a question of incriminating the fact that pornographic content can be seen or perceived by a minor. But it is much more difficult to convince that pornography is inherently bad and should be subject to more general restrictions. Its advocates argue that it belongs to cinematographic art and invoke freedom of expression and the right to respect for private life. In this context, the recent judgment of the European Court of Human Rights in the Council of Europe, in the case of Šošoľač versus Slovakia, can be mentioned. In this case, a prisoner complained that his pornographic pictures were confiscated and that he received a reprimand for possessing them, although it is forbidden in Slovak prisons. Unfortunately, the court ruled that such a general ban on pornography in prison violates the right to respect for private life. The court made no moral judgment on pornography and considered it as a private matter without consequences. So this is a very bad signal when protecting both the people depicted and the consumers, especially youth, and other vulnerable people is an absolute necessity. Banning all forms of pornography is an obviously controversial measure, which in any case has the advantage of considering pornography as intrinsically evil and contrary to human dignity. According to the 1992 Catechism of the Catholic Church, civil authorities should prevent the production and distribution of pornographic materials. Here, the existence of the International Convention for the Suppression of the Circulation of and Traffic in Obscene Publications, adopted within the United Nations in 1923, should be noted. Several dozen states or parties, including member states of the European Union, such as Poland, it seems, through this treaty, they have committed themselves to prosecute and punish pornographic traffic in very broad terms, both as regards the types of content and the acts related to this, production, possession, circulation. The question that arises is that of its relevance in the Internet age, but given its very broad scope, this text does not seem anachronistic. Where pornography is not prohibited, other measures are needed to regulate access, such as placing a warning message on pornographic materials. There should be such an obligation on websites and publishers of such materials, in the same way as warning labels for alcohol, tobacco, online gambling. In the United States, Utah has passed the porn warning label law, requiring on pain of a fine that a warning message appear for at least 5 seconds before any pornographic content is displayed, or that a warning message appear before accessing a pornographic site, and that the site make a reasonable effort to verify the age of users. Another measure is to require that a filter or parental control software be activated by default on devices connected to the internet as soon as they leave the factory, allowing them to be deactivated at the request of the contract holder. In the United States, several states have implemented such a device on phones. In Poland, a law on the protection of minors against access to inappropriate content on the internet is currently in project, but its purpose is to require internet providers to only offer their customers a free-of-charge mechanism for blocking children's access to pornographic content, and to promote this mechanism, to report on the actions taken in this area. In any case, such filters or parental control software should be activated in schools and libraries as required by some 15 US states. However, such measures have disadvantages because they imply drawing up a list of prohibited websites in real time, which can be complicated given the number of pornographic sites. And there is also a risk of blocking harmless sites, that is to say, not classified as pornographic. Then, imposing obligations on online services providers in the field of moderation and notification can help eradicate some of the harmful content that would otherwise be accessible to minors. This is of particular importance for platforms that are not pornographic per se, but on which such content can be found, including social networks. And it is to be hoped that the new Digital Services Act that has just been adopted within the European Union in October 2022 will make it possible to step up the fight against pornography in Europe, in particular by making the very large online platforms such as Google, Facebook, more accountable. For example, online platforms will have to put in place mechanisms enabling users to easily report illegal content, and they will have to process notices quickly. They will have to cooperate with trusted flaggers whose notices will be given priority. Very large online platforms have additional obligations to manage the systemic risks associated with the services they provide, including regarding the rights of the child. Last point, requiring pornographic sites to verify the age of their users. It's a measure widely promoted at the European level, but it faces technical and legal difficulties residing in the choice of the technical device, protection of the internet user's personal data, possibilities of circumvention, the scale of regulation. For example, United Kingdom included such an obligation among the provisions of the 2017 Digital Economy Act, the implementation of this measure was postponed several times and abandoned in 2019, but it's again discussed in a new online safety bill. France is currently struggling to enforce the age verification requirement from a 2020 law to protect victims of domestic violence. In Poland, a draft law on the protection of minors against pornographic content had been presented by the Twoja Sprawa Association in December 2019 and provided for mandatory age verification of users by sites giving access to pornographic content, including under penalty of inclusion on a register of illegal pornographic sites. It seems to be at a standstill. Let's conclude. Pornography has these very deep repercussions from which a great number of people and families suffer today. In fact, the whole society is ultimately impacted as pornography engenders violence, contempt, shame, and affects human beings in what is most human, namely their relationship and their capacity to love. However, legal bases exist at the European and international level to fight. And the ball is therefore in the court of policymakers, but the will often seems to be lacking. As the academic Robert Jensen reminds us, resistance to pornography is not an attack on freedom, but rather a struggle for more freedom. However, the pornographic plague takes advantage of the taboo surrounding it, and in order to be free of it, it is important to break this taboo by shedding light on ourselves, in our families, and in society on this phenomenon and its consequences. And as Christ tells us, the truth will set you free. Thank you very much.